Titan was a hellhole even before the aliens showed up, but at least it was our hellhole. Now, well, you could say it's a bit crowded with unwelcome guests. Calder Vox, human envoy extraordinaire, or just the only poor bastard left with any negotiating skills, stepped off the shuttle onto the ice-crusted surface of Titan, his face a mask of grim determination. Or maybe it was just frozen that way. "Cold enough for you, Lyra?" he asked, breath visible in the thin atmosphere like some kind of existential sigh. Lyra Quell, engineer and professional cynic, merely grunted, which was basically a whole speech coming from her. She adjusted her helmet, the visor reflecting the cold, indifferent stars. "I've had warmer welcomes at a funeral, Calder." "Ah, the good old human hospitality," Calder replied, scanning the horizon. The Murlax embassy loomed like a giant alien middle finger over the landscape, a hodgepodge of angles and curves that made no architectural sense. It probably looked stunning in whatever dimension the Murlax hailed from. Here, it just looked like someone tried building a skyscraper out of wet cardboard in spite. The pair trudged through the icy slush, their boots crunching ominously. Each step was a reminder that Titan wasn't interested in playing host, especially not to humans or their new best friends, the Murlax. "So, what's the plan?" Lyra asked, her voice crackling over the comms. "We get in, say a few nice words, and hope they don't decide we're better off as meat popsicles, something like that." "Apparently, they're building some kind of device," Calder said, waving his arm in what he hoped was a mysterious manner. "Gotta find out what it is, or if it's just another one of their bad ideas. Great. Alien science fair. Just what I was hoping for when I signed up for this gig." They reached the entrance, a door that looked suspiciously like it had been designed by a committee. It opened with a hiss that might have been intimidating if it weren't for the fact it sounded like a tired old man letting out a flatulent sigh. "Welcome to the future, where even doors judge you." Inside, the embassy was warmer, but only just. It was like walking into a fridge after you've had a fight with the thermostat. The walls were a blend of organic and mechanical, pulsing with a sickly blue light that made everything look as though it was underwater. The Murlax themselves were waiting. If you thought they'd look any friendlier in person, you'd be wrong. Tall, gangly, and with too many joints in all the wrong places, they swayed slightly, as if the act of standing still was a personal offense. "Ah, humans," gurgled one of them, voice like a blender full of gravel. "Welcome to Murlax Embassy. We appreciate compliance with diplomacy procedures." Calder forced a smile that felt as real as a politician's promise. "Always happy to comply. Love a good procedure. This is Lyra, my engineer. She's here to make sure we don't accidentally blow ourselves up, or intentionally," Lyra added helpfully, earning a side-eye from Calder. The Murlax nodded, or at least wobbled in a way that implied nodding. "We are constructing device to enhance relations." "Enhance relations, eh?" Calder said. "Last time someone tried to enhance relations, I ended up needing 3 stitches and a new pair of pants," Lyra snorted. "What Calder means is, we're very interested in the device." "Perhaps a tour, of course," replied the Murlax, waving them forward with a limb that might have been an arm. They moved through the corridors, each turn revealing more of the same unsettling architecture. It was like they'd hired M.C. Escher as their interior decorator. Calder leaned closer to Lyra as they walked. "Keep your eyes peeled. If this thing they're making is as dangerous as I think, we'll need to know how to disable it. Been keeping my eyes peeled since before we landed." "If they get any more peeled, they'll fall out," Lyra muttered, adjusting a panel on her wrist device. "Got a scan running. If there's anything here that shouldn't be, I'll find it." They reached a large chamber filled with the hum of machinery. A complex web of pipes and glowing conduits converged on a massive, ominous device at the center. It looked like a cross between a nuclear reactor and a very angry, very drunk octopus. "This is the device," the Murlax announced proudly. "It will change everything." "Yeah, that's what I was afraid of," Calder said under his breath. Lyra was already scanning the room, her mind whirring faster than the machinery. This thing is sucking in power like a black hole at a buffet. Whatever it's doing it big. Big's not always better, Lyra, Calder replied, eyes locked on the machine. Sometimes it's just big enough to get you into trouble. The Murlax gestured to the device, oblivious to the human's unease. With this, we will have control. Peaceful, of course, Calder echoed. He didn't believe it for a second. Peaceful control was a contradiction in terms like military intelligence or friendly fire. Think it's a mind control thing. Lyra whispered. If it is, it's the worst one I've seen, Calder replied. But let's not hang around to find out. We'll need detailed schematics to properly appreciate your device, Lyra said aloud, putting on her best professional tone. You know, for the report, yes, report, Calder chimed in, nodding so emphatically he worried his head might fall off. Always good to have a detailed report. The Murlax hesitated, their collective gaze shifting, perhaps consulting with unseen comrades or just deciding whether to classify the humans as pests. We shall provide schematics. In meantime, return to your quarters. Charming, Lyra said as they were led back through the corridors, the Murlax's footsteps sounding like a herd of drunken flamingos. As they reached their assigned quarters, a room that could generously be described as a closet with delusions of grandeur, Calder collapsed onto the single piece of furniture. We've been here 5 minutes and already I feel like I'm in a hostage situation. Could be worse, Lyra replied, dropping into a chair with a resigned sigh. Could be on Earth dealing with politicians, true. Here, at least, the aliens are honest about wanting to screw us over. Calder rubbed his temples. We need those schematics. If they're building a weapon, we can't let them finish it. Lyra nodded, her fingers dancing over her wrist device. Already working on hacking their system. Shouldn't be too hard. They might be advanced, but their cybersecurity is about as robust as wet tissue paper. Good. Let's see if we can figure out what they are up to before they figure out we're onto them. Always nice to be one step ahead, Lyra said with a humorless chuckle. Or at least not several steps behind. Calder leaned back, staring at the ceiling, which was doing its best impression of a migraine. You ever wonder why we do this, Lyra? Do what? Try not to get killed by aliens while everyone back home pretends everything's fine, yeah. Exactly that, Lyra shrugged. It's either this or spend the rest of our lives pretending to care about the price of potatoes back on Earth. And let's be honest, potatoes are boring as hell. Calder laughed, and for a moment, the oppressive weight of the situation lifted. You make a compelling argument. Just then, the door chimed with a tone that suggested whoever was outside had all the patience of a caffeinated squirrel. Expecting company? Lyra asked, eyebrow raised. Not unless the Murlax have started offering room service. Calder opened the door to find a Murlax standing, if that was the right word. It held a translucent data pad, its surface flickering with alien script. Your schematics, it said, thrusting the pad at Calder like it was a hot potato. Wow, fast service, Lyra said, trying not to sound too surprised. The Murlax gave a gurgling noise that might have been a laugh. We are efficient. As the Murlax wobbled away, Calder closed the door, turning to Lyra with the expression of a man who'd just found a priceless vase at a yard sale. Looks like our luck's turning. Or this is the bait they want us to swallow, Lyra cautioned, taking the pad and plugging it into her device. Either way, at least we're getting somewhere. Calder watched as lines of data scrolled across Lyra's screen, her face a mask of concentration. What do you see? Trouble, she replied, her voice tight. Big, ugly, and possibly universe-ending trouble. Calder's stomach did a somersault that would have earned a gold medal. Wonderful, just what we needed, yeah. And if we're gonna stop this, we'll have to do it fast, and with style. Lyra smirked, though her eyes held a seriousness that belied her words. Never anything but, Calder said as he leaned back in his chair, the weight of the universe pressing down on him once more, the faint hint of a plan beginning to form. And as they sat there in the dim, alien-lit room, the two humans found themselves on the brink, staring into an abyss filled with the unknown, armed with nothing but wits, guts, and a strong distaste for being conquered. The game was on. Calder Vox and Lyra Quell sat hunched over the flickering data pad as if it were about to reveal the universe's worst-kept secret, how to royally screw over the human race. Lyra's fingers danced across her wrist device, every tap sounding like a countdown to doom. Not exactly the Christmas present I was hoping for, Calder muttered, eyes narrowed at the alien script. Looks like the Murlocs intend to speed up our workdays. Literally. Yeah, nothing like time manipulation to make you miss a good old-fashioned migraine from a 9 to 5, Lyra replied, her voice laced with the kind of sarcasm that could cut through steel. Their device doesn't just want a speed time for a select few. No, they intend to fast-forward humanity into an eternity of unpaid overtime. Calder ran a hand through his hair, which, thanks to the stress of interstellar diplomacy, seemed to be retreating faster than a coward in a war zone. These schematics, they're not just for a weapon. They are for our very own time prison. Nobody's got time for that. Literally, Lyra snickered despite herself. If the Murlocs were human, they'd probably be middle management. Work faster, not smarter. Let's hope they haven't figured out the magic of performance reviews yet, Calder said, leaning back and staring at the Spartan ceiling, which didn't even have the decency to be interesting. If they're planning to enslave humanity by making us work faster, it's pretty clear why they wanted us all the way out here on Titan. Lyra glanced at the door, as if expecting a Murlocs to burst in and offer them another helping of eternal servitude. We need to warn Earth. Get some backup, because I don't fancy going solo against the universe's worst micromanagers. Yeah, well, about that, Calder sighed, rubbing his temples as though trying to massage away the impending headache of heroic proportions. I've tried contacting Earth, but it's like trying to get a straight answer out of a politician. Everything's blocked, that's just peachy. Lyra typed a few more commands into her device, her brow furrowed. Our comms are jammed tighter than a jar of pickles. Whoever's running this show is doing a damn fine job keeping us isolated. Calder gave a humorless chuckle. Figures. Last time I felt this cut off, I was stuck at a family reunion with no Wi-Fi, Lyra smirked. I'd take a family reunion over this. At least there's usually cake. Their banter was interrupted by a harsh, grating tone from the data pad, like someone playing a symphony with a chainsaw. The screen flashed a particularly ominous alien diagram and Lyra's face darkened. "Bingo," she whispered, "I've got a lead. Looks like the power source for this monstrosity is deep in the embassy. If we can disrupt it, we might just stall their plans. Perfect." "A mission into the belly of the beast," Calder said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Nothing says adventure like imminent death. Hey, it's either this or wait around for the Murlocs to hand us a time card," Lyra shot back, packing up her equipment. "Let's get going while we still have the element of surprise, or at least ignorance." Calder stood, stretching the kinks out of his back. Right, off to poke the bear. Or in this case, the tentacle monster with a penchant for time travel. They exited the room, slipping into the shadowed corridors of the embassy. It was like trying to navigate a maze designed by a particularly sadistic toddler. The path twisted and turned with a complete disregard for Euclidean geometry, or sanity, for that matter. You ever get the feeling you're walking through an alien fever dream? Calder asked, ducking under a particularly low-hanging archway that seemed to serve no purpose other than to give visitors a concussion. "Every damn second," Lyra replied, keeping her eyes peeled for any signs of movement. "The architecture here makes Picasso look like an amateur." They moved deeper into the embassy, the ambient light casting long, eerie shadows that danced like ghosts at a disco. Every sound seemed amplified in the silence, from the hum of machinery to their own footsteps. Finally, they reached a chamber that hummed with the power of a small sun. It was filled with conduits and glowing panels, the air thick with the scent of ozone and impending disaster. At the center stood the power source, a pulsating core that throbbed with a malignant energy. There it is, Lyra said, gesturing to the core. The heart of the beast. Looks nastier than my ex's cooking, Calder quipped, eyeing the core. And probably just as deadly. Lyra began fiddling with her device, scanning the core with the precision of a surgeon. We need to disrupt this without turning ourselves into space dust. Any bright ideas? Could try smacking it with a wrench, Calder suggested, only half joking. Tempting, Lyra admitted, but let's not blow up half of Titan just yet. I think I can overload the system, cause a feedback loop that'll fry their circuits without turning us into charred husks. Music to my ears, Calder replied, watching as Lyra worked her magic, her fingers a blur of motion. Think it'll be enough to stop them, hopefully, Lyra said, her voice laced with a mixture of confidence and desperation. If not, well, it's been a pleasure knowing you. Likewise, Calder said, his tone teasing despite the dire situation. But let's not plan the farewell party just yet. Lyra's device beeped, indicating the process was underway. The core began to flicker, its glow stuttering like a failing light bulb. The air was filled with a growing hum, an ominous crescendo that promised chaos. Let's move, Lyra urged, already heading for the exit. Calder didn't need to be told twice. They hightailed it out of the chamber, the walls vibrating with the strain of the overloaded system. As they ran, Calder couldn't help but marvel at the irony of it all. They were saving humanity from a fate worse than death, and they couldn't even tell anyone about it. They reached the corridor just as the chamber behind them erupted in a shower of sparks and smoke. The entire structure shuddered, a metallic groan echoing through the halls like the death rattle of a dying beast. Well, that was fun, Calder said as they slowed to a walk, both of them panting from the exertion. Next time, let's try disarming a bomb on a sunny beach somewhere. Deal, Lyra replied, a grin tugging at the corners of her mouth despite the chaos. Though knowing our luck, it'll probably rain. They made their way back to their cramped quarters, slipping inside and locking the door behind them. Both collapsed, exhaustion and adrenaline leaving them shaky but exhilarated. We did it, Calder said, the reality of their success sinking in. We actually did it for now, Lyra reminded him, ever the realist. The Murlacs won't give up that easily. We've bought ourselves some time, but we need to get help. Fast, Calder nodded, leaning back and closing his eyes. Right. Once the dust settles, we'll try again to reach Earth. Let them know what's really going on out here, and if the Murlacs come knocking, Lyra asked, her voice carrying a hint of future nightmares. Calder opened one eye, a mischievous glint shining through. Then we'll just have to improvise. Like always, Lyra chuckled softly, the sound a welcome relief against the tension that still hung in the air. Improvisation, our specialty. Who knew saving the world would require so much winging it? Yeah, Calder replied, finally allowing himself a genuine smile. But hey, if it works, it works. As they settled in for what promised to be a restless night, the weight of their actions began to set in. They had struck a blow against the Murlacs, but the war was far from over. The future loomed uncertain, fraught with danger and potential disaster. But for now, they were alive, still kicking, and with the faintest glimmer of hope on the horizon. In the grand game of interstellar politics, they were just getting started, and they had every intention of rewriting the rules. After all, when faced with a universe intent on grinding you to dust, the only thing to do was stand tall, laugh in its face, and show it that humanity wasn't going to go quietly into the night. And as they drifted into a fitful sleep, one thought lingered in the back of Calder's mind, a reminder of the stakes, the danger, and the thrill of the impossible. Tomorrow would be another day, another fight, another chance to prove that even in the darkest of times, humans could be the most unpredictable, irreverent, and downright stubborn creatures in the galaxy. Calder Vox sat hunched over a table strewn with wires, circuit boards, and the kind of tech gadgetry that usually required a doctorate in "what the hell am I doing?" to understand. Lyra Quell, ever the improviser, was elbow-deep in the guts of a device that looked like a toaster had a drunken one-night stand with a supercomputer. "So what's the plan, genius?" Calder asked, trying to untangle a wire from his sleeve. "You think we'll actually be able to throw a wrench in their clock-punching scheme with, whatever this is?" Lyra, not even bothering to look up from her work, gave a snort that could have stripped paint. "You know, Calder, your optimism is just so damn contagious." "I'd bottle it if I didn't think it would cause a health crisis." "Hey, I'm just asking," Calder shrugged, pulling up a chair that creaked under the weight of his skepticism. "If we're going to take a swing at the universe, I'd like to know if we're using a bat or a balloon animal." "Think of it as a bat made out of duct tape and dreams," Lyra said, finally looking up with a grin that bordered on maniacal. "This little beast will disrupt the resonance frequency of the Murlax's device, temporarily at least, kind of like telling someone their flies down during a keynote speech." Calder chuckled, a noise that sounded suspiciously like a cough. "Right, just enough to embarrass them but not enough to stop the show." "How various." Lyra returned to her work, fingers flying over the controls of her wrist device like a pianist on the cusp of a minor breakdown. "Problem is, we need a live test, otherwise we're just guessing." Calder felt his stomach do an uncomfortable flip. "A live test? You mean we have to get back inside the embassy?" "The place brimming with tentacle enthusiasts who'd love to see us flayed alive." "Got it in one," Lyra said, her voice far too cheerful for Calder's taste. "We disrupt it, see what happens, and if we're lucky, the Murlax won't notice our tampering until they are too busy cursing in whatever passes for their language." Calder leaned back, smirking despite himself. "Lucky, she says. I guess we weren't lucky enough getting stranded on Titan with these overgrown calamari. Maybe this time's the charm." "Never underestimate the power of human stupidity, Calder," Lyra said, packing up her makeshift contraption into a backpack that looked like it had seen one too many bar fights. "It's got us this far." They both knew it was a long shot, an underfunded, understaffed, suicidal tendency soundtracked long shot. But it was what they'd signed up for, knowingly or unknowingly, when they decided to poke the Murlax bare. The embassy loomed ahead, a grotesque reminder that alien architecture should never be mixed with hallucinogens. "We should move," Lyra said, the weight of her backpack making her motion resemble that of a drunk turtle. "The longer we wait, the more likely we'll be spotted." Calder nodded, checking his own gear, mostly to ensure he hadn't forgotten something important like his courage. "Right. Let's go play with the interstellar fuse box." They slipped through the corridors, shadows in an alien waltz. The hallways were as nonsensical as ever, like walking through a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Every corner turned promised a new assault on their sanity or at least their patience. "Seriously, who designed this place?" Calder muttered, ducking under a low-hanging pipe that seemed to serve no purpose other than to irritate tall people. "It's like MC. Escher got drunk and decided to go into interior design. Maybe it's meant to confuse invaders," Lyra suggested, keeping her eyes peeled for any signs of Murlax patrols. "Of course, it also means their own people probably get lost half the time." Finally, they reached the chamber where the Murlax device held sway over time itself, or at least was trying to. The air thrummed with an energy that made Calder's skin crawl. The device stood in the center, surrounded by conduits that pulsed with an unsettling rhythm. "All right, let's see if this thing works," Lyra said, unslinging her backpack and extracting the improvised jammer which looked like the love child of a hair dryer and a bomb. "Keep an eye out while I do this." Calder nodded, glancing around the chamber. "Sure thing. I'll scream like a little girl if I see anything with too many limbs." Lyra set to work, connecting her device to the Murlax machinery with the care of someone defusing a bomb. Calder watched her, feeling as useful as a chocolate teapot in a heat wave. The tension was palpable, thickening the air like invisible fog. "Almost there," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just a few more seconds." Suddenly, an alarm blared loud enough to make Calder's heart try to leap out through his throat. The chamber was bathed in red light, and a sound like 1,000 buzzing insects filled the air. "Guess we pressed the wrong button," Calder shouted over the noise, already backing away. Time to go, Lyra snapped, yanking her device free with a practiced motion. They ran, the blaring alarms promising a hasty and unpleasant death if they lingered. The corridors were a blur as they sprinted, each turn a gamble that they wouldn't run headlong into a squad of Murlac's enforcers. Think we broke it, Calder yelled, adrenaline making his voice higher than he'd like. Hopefully, Lyra replied, not missing a step. If not, I'll buy you a drink in the afterlife. They burst through the embassy doors, the cold, Titan air hitting them like a slap to the face. Calder barely registered the chill, focused entirely on putting as much distance between them and the Murlacs as possible. We need to find somewhere to hide, Lyra panted, scanning the landscape. I doubt they're gonna just let us walk away from this. Calder nodded, his mind racing. The human embassy staff, we should rally them, get them on our side. We're gonna need more than just the two of us if we're gonna keep this up. Lyra gave a tight smile, nodding. Let's hope they're as crazy as we are. They trudged through Titan's icy wilderness, the landscape stark and unforgiving. It was a place that had no business being hospitable to any form of life, yet here they were, plotting rebellion against time-bending mollusks. Hey, Calder, Lyra said, her breath visible in the freezing air. You think Earth's gonna name a holiday after us when this is all over? If we win, maybe, Calder replied, his tone as dry as the wasteland they traversed. If we lose, they'll probably just name a crater. They made their way to the human quarters, a ramshackle collection of prefabricated structures that looked about as welcoming as a dentist's office. Calder pushed open the door to the main building, finding a handful of bleary-eyed staff who looked like they'd been counting ceiling tiles in their sleep. Listen up, Calder announced, drawing their attention. We've got a situation. The Murlacs are building something that'll make your worst nightmare look like a day at the beach, and we need your help to stop it. The staff exchanged glances, skepticism etched across their faces. One of them, a grizzled engineer named Bex, folded her arms and raised an eyebrow. And why should we trust you? Last I heard, you two were the ones causing all the trouble. Calder threw up his hands. Because we're not asking you to trust us. We're asking you to trust that you don't want to be stuck working for the Murlacs forever. They've got plans to turn us into their personal slaves, and we're the only ones trying to stop it. Lyra stepped up, her voice carrying the weight of someone who's seen too much. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and probably out of our minds. But if we don't act, we're done for. We need your skills, your knowledge, your willingness to fight back. There was a long pause, the kind that stretched out like a bad joke without a punchline. Finally, Bex sighed, rubbing the back of her neck. All right, fine, we'll help, but this better not get us all killed. No promises, Calder said, grinning despite the odds. But it's better than the alternative. With their allies secured, Calder and Lyra began planning their next move. They needed to hit the Murlacs hard, disrupt their operations, and buy Earth enough time to respond. It was a tall order, but desperation had a way of making the impossible seem merely improbable. As they worked, Calder couldn't help but reflect on how far they'd come. From scraping by on the edges of space to this, leading a ragtag group of humans against an alien menace that could bend time itself. Hey, Lyra, he said, glancing over at her as she pored over a map of the Murlac's embassy. You ever think we'd end up here? Lyra chuckled, shaking her head. Not in a million years. But if this is where we make our stand, I'm glad it's with you. Calder nodded, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the space heater humming in the corner. Me too. They had a plan, a purpose, and an unlikely band of allies. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them going. The Murlacs had made a critical mistake. They'd underestimated the tenacity of humans and their penchant for chaos. As the hours ticked by, Calder found himself filled with a strange mixture of dread and exhilaration. Tomorrow, they'd strike back. Tomorrow, they'd show the universe what humanity was capable of when pushed to the brink. And if tomorrow went as planned, the Murlacs would find themselves facing a foe far more formidable than they could have ever imagined. The Murlax embassy had transformed overnight from a nonsensical architectural disaster into something resembling a maximum security prison. More guards, more surveillance, and, Calder noted with a grimace, more tentacles. Alien paranoia at its finest. The news wasn't good. It never was. But that didn't stop Calder and Lyra from their grim task. "Looks like the calamari decided to tighten the net," Calder commented, peering through a set of binoculars that had seen better days. The embassy was alive with ominous activity, and the air crackled with energy that made his skin itch. "Guess they didn't appreciate our last visit," Lyra replied, adjusting the strap of her backpack. "Can't say I blame them. We did pretty well at making a mess of their toys." "Yeah, but it seems like they're doubling down," Calder said, lowering the binoculars. "They're testing the time dilation device. On people." Lyra paused, her expression hardening. "That's a new level of nasty even for them." "Tell me about it." "They're using it on prisoners, seeing how much they can bend time before things start falling apart." "It'll be us next if we don't do something." A humorless laugh escaped Lyra's lips. "Well, it's nice to know they've got a career plan for us. Makes me miss the days when they just wanted to vaporize us outright." The resistance group was a ragtag bunch of underfed, overtired humans whose morale was as low as their rations. If humans were known for anything, though, it was their stubborn refusal to give up when things went to hell. A quality that had yet to endear them to the Murlax, who were evidently beginning to find it all more trouble than it was worth. Calder gathered them in the dreary common room, where the decor consisted mostly of motivational posters that seemed to mock them more than anything. "All right, folks, listen up," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "The Murlax are cranking up their time dilation funhouse, and they're using it on our people. We need to put a stop to it." Bex, who had unofficially taken on the role of the group's cynic-in-chief, snorted. "Great, so we went from being outgunned to being outgunned and outtimed." "How are we supposed to fight clocks?" "We're not," Lyra interjected, tapping her data pad with a knowing smile that suggested she had a trick up her sleeve. "We're going to make their clocks explode." "Explode," a voice piped up from the back of the room. "Sounds dangerous, I like it." "Exactly," Lyra continued. "We've got a chance to hijack their tech. I think I've cracked enough of the Murlax code to put a serious dent in their plans. We can disrupt their time dilation device long enough to get our people out." Calder gave her a skeptical look. "And what if your little science experiment backfires? Then we'll be fashionably late to our own funeral," she quipped, not missing a beat. The mood in the room shifted, fear, yes, but also a flicker of hope. Distrustful as they were by nature, this group of humans had nothing left to lose and everything to gain by following these two lunatics into the jaws of the alien beast. "All right," Calder said, raising his voice to address them all. "We're going to need everyone on board. Bex, I need you to rig us something that'll blow a hole in the embassy's defenses. And try not to vaporize us in the process." Bex gave a mock salute. "I'll see what I can do. Won't be pretty, but it should do the job." "You've got 24 hours," Lyra added, glancing at her wrist device. "We hit them tomorrow night. Give them a surprise they'll never forget." The meeting dissolved into preparation, a frenzy of activity that was part organized chaos, part desperate gamble. Calder and Lyra huddled together, finalizing their plan amidst the commotion. "Think this will work?" Calder asked, keeping his voice low. "I think we're out of options," Lyra said, her eyes scanning the schematics on her data pad. "But hey, if we pull this off, I'll buy you a drink. Maybe two. I'll hold you to that." By the time the sun dipped below Titan's horizon, casting the landscape in a pallid glow, everything was in place. What they lacked in resources, they made up for in sheer determination and a complete disregard for personal safety. As the group moved silently towards the Murlax embassy, Calder felt a strange mix of fear and adrenaline. They were about to gamble everything on a few small devices and a lot of wishful thinking. "Remember," Lyra whispered to the group as they crouched at the edge of the embassy grounds, "we go in, disrupt the device, Get our people out and get the hell out of there before the Murlacs know what hit them. Piece of cake, Calder muttered, earning a few nervous chuckles. With Bex's makeshift explosives ready to cause a distraction, they crept forward. The night was still, the kind of silence that made you acutely aware of your own heartbeat. "Let's hope this works," Calder whispered to Lyra, his hand hovering over the detonation switch. "Always wanted to go out with a bang," Lyra replied, flashing a grin that was more manic than reassuring. The explosion rocked the night, a flash of light and sound that turned the embassy's defenses into so much alien confetti. The group surged forward, capitalizing on the chaos. Inside, the Murlacs scrambled, their tentacles flailing as they attempted to respond to the unexpected attack. Calder led the charge, his group sweeping through the halls like a knife through warm butter, or at least the closest analogy one could make on an alien moon. Lyra had the unenviable task of reaching the control room, her fingers dancing across her data pad as she worked to breach their systems. The Murlacs had left their digital backdoor wide open, and she planned on marching right through it. "How's it going?" Calder called out, ducking behind cover as a stray laser shot passed over his head. "Almost there," Lyra shouted back, frantically tapping commands. "Just need a few more seconds." Seconds they didn't have as the Murlacs began to rally, their numbers threatening to overwhelm the Resistance fighters. Calder fired off a few shots, suppressing the alien guards while Lyra worked her magic. "Any second now, Lyra," Calder yelled, his voice tinged with a hint of panic. With a final flourish, Lyra hit the execute command, and the entire embassy shook as the time dilation device sputtered and ground to a halt. The Murlacs were left reeling, their temporal controls slipping away like sand through fingers. "Got it," Lyra announced triumphantly, her face flushed with victory. Calder grinned, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Then let's get out of here while we still can." They fought their way back through the chaos, freeing the imprisoned humans and making a hasty retreat. It was chaotic, messy, and far from perfect, but somehow it worked. By the time they stumbled out into the frigid Titan night, the Murlacs' embassy lay in disarray behind them. A small victory, but a victory nonetheless. As they regrouped, catching their breath and counting their casualties, Calder turned to Lyra, a weary smile on his lips. "You owe me a drink." Lyra laughed, the tension of the night giving way to a sense of shared triumph. "I'll get you too." The atmosphere among their ragtag group of survivors was buoyant, a stark contrast to the grim reality they faced. The Murlacs weren't defeated, not yet, but they'd been hit hard. Hard enough to make them reconsider their plans, at least for a little while. As they began the trek back to their base, Calder found himself thinking about the future. They'd won this battle, but the war was far from over. The Murlacs weren't going to take this lying down, and they would come back, likely with a vengeance. But for now, they had bought themselves time. Time to regroup, time to plan, time to continue their fight against an enemy that underestimated them at every turn. "Nice work back there," Calder said to Lyra, as they trudged side by side through the Titan dust. "Thanks," she replied, her voice tinged with exhaustion but also something akin to hope. "Couldn't have done it without you." Calder smirked, trying to shake off the lingering adrenaline. "Well, I did say I'd scream if I saw anything with too many limbs." Lyra chuckled, the sound carrying across the barren landscape. "You did, and I promise next time I'll bring earmuffs." They walked on into the night, the stars above a silent witness to their defiance. Their fight was only beginning, but for the first time in a long time, Calder felt a glimmer of something he hardly dared to name: hope. The aftermath of the ambush was a cocktail best served with regret and a chaser of impending doom. Calder found himself with a fresh appreciation for the phrase, "caught with your pants down," though in his case, it was more like being caught with alien tentacles around his throat. The raid had gone well enough, until it hadn't. Now, he was in the unenviable position of being a guest of honor in the Murlacs' very own house of horrors. The embassy's cold, alien architecture loomed around him, all sharp angles and unsettling organic patterns that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. "Welcome to Murlac's Lodge," he muttered to himself, hands clamped in restraints that were ostensibly designed for species with more limbs than he possessed. All the comforts of home, if home were a technicolor nightmare. The Murlacs didn't respond to his sarcasm, which was a shame. Calder had always believed humor was the best medicine, and right now, he was in desperate need of a cure for existential dread. Instead, their tentacles worked with a grim efficiency, tightening the cuffs as they dragged him through the labyrinthine corridors. Meanwhile, outside, Lyra was making a less than graceful exit. She had narrowly escaped the clutches of the Murlacs, her data pad clutched tightly to her chest like a lifeline. In the chaos of retreat, she'd lost sight of Calder, and the knot in her stomach twisted with the knowledge that he'd been captured. Sliding into the shadows of Titan's barren landscape, Lyra spared a moment to catch her breath, her mind racing. She'd managed to download critical data before the whole fiasco blew up in their faces, and now it was all up to her. Somehow, the idea of being humanity's last hope wasn't quite as thrilling as she'd imagined during late-night planning sessions. "Calder, you better be alive," she muttered to herself, more a plea than a statement. "I didn't sign up for this solo hero gig." Back in the Murlac's embassy, Calder was trying to maintain his composure, which was harder than it sounded when staring down a multitude of eyes that regarded him like a particularly scrawny hors d'oeuvre. The aliens communicated in a series of clicks and whistles, a soundscape that reminded him of the time he'd accidentally swallowed a mechanical cricket as a kid. "Look, if this is about the time I reprogrammed your vending machines to dispense fireworks, I can explain," Calder said, his voice echoing slightly in the sterile room. "It was all for the greater good. I mean, who doesn't love a surprise pyrotechnics show with their snacks?" The Murlacs, predictably, were not amused. They circled him, their tentacles weaving a tapestry of malice. One particularly large Murlacs, who Calder mentally nicknamed Squidward due to its disgruntled demeanor, stepped forward, producing a device that looked suspiciously like a cross between a blender and a medieval torture instrument. "Oh good, I was hoping for a smoothie," Calder quipped, the bravado in his voice only slightly undermined by the fact that he was very likely about to be liquefied. "Hope you remembered the strawberries." The device hummed ominously, and Calder's grin faltered. He had a bad feeling that whatever the Murlacs intended, it wasn't going to end with a refreshing beverage. Meanwhile, back at the Resistance base, morale was plummeting faster than Calder's chances at a Murlacs-hosted soiree. Without their de facto leader, the group was a headless chicken, albeit one armed with a few explosives and a healthy dose of desperation. Bex paced the room, the echo of their footsteps a constant reminder that they were running out of time. "We can't just leave him there," they said, frustration lacing their words. "Calder's the only one who knows how to make sense of that alien tech." A murmur of agreement spread through the group, but it was tinged with anxiety. They were fighters, yes, but this was starting to feel less like a revolution and more like an elaborate suicide pact. Lyra burst in, her entrance as subtle as a meteor impact. "I've got the data," she announced, waving the data pad triumphantly. "It's a start, but we need Calder back. The Murlacs are planning a big demonstration of their device. They want to crush us once and for all, and if we don't stop them, they'll succeed." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them like a shroud. The Murlacs weren't just playing with time. They were planning to make an example of humanity, a grand gesture to prove their superiority once and for all. "So what's the plan?" Bex asked, the skepticism in their voice tempered by a sliver of hope. Lyra took a deep breath, her mind racing with possibilities. "We go in, we get Calder out, and we sabotage their demonstration. We've got to show them that humans aren't just stubborn, they are a thorn in the side that's not going away." "Sounds easy enough," Bex said dryly. "And here I was worried we'd have to do something difficult." The group dissolved into a flurry of activity, the air buzzing with the energy of a plan cobbled together with spit and duct tape. It was reckless, it was dangerous, and it was probably going to get them killed. but it was also their only chance. As Lyra sketched out the details, her mind kept flickering back to Calder. She could almost hear his voice, dripping with sarcasm, muttering about how altruism was a terrible idea. They needed him back, not just for his technical expertise, but because he was the glue that held their ragtag band of rebels together. "Let's do this," Lyra said, her voice firm despite the uncertainty gnawing at her gut. "We've got one shot, so let's make it count." Meanwhile, in the deeper recesses of the Murlac's embassy, Calder was discovering that his captors lacked a sense of humor about as much as they lacked any interest in his well-being. Locked in a cell whose walls seemed to close in with every passing second, he pondered the wisdom of ever leaving his bed this morning. "Hey, Squidward," he called to the nearest guard, genuinely curious whether the Murlacs had ears where Calder imagined them. "You guys have a plan for this whole temporal tyranny thing, or are you just winging it?" The guard didn't reply, which was understandable given its lack of a visible mouth. Instead, it pointed a tentacle at a device in the corner, the time dilation device, Calder realized. It was humming quietly, an insidious sound that whispered of twisted timelines and stolen Iors. "Ah, a demonstration," Calder said, still trying to fill the oppressive silence with words. "You know, you could have just invited me to the PowerPoint presentation. I make a mean slide transition." The guard turned its many eyes on him, an unreadable expression on its alien features. In that moment, Calder felt a pang of something he might have called fear if he were being honest with himself. The Murlacs intended to show their hand, and if he didn't act soon, humanity's time might quite literally run out. And then it happened. A flicker of movement at the cell's entrance, a shadow slipping through the cracks. Lyra, her silhouette backlit by the harsh lighting of the corridor, her face set with grim determination. "Calder, you look like you've been having a great time," she said, her voice a whisper that barely reached his ears. "Thought I'd crash the party." "You know me," Calder replied, his relief palpable. "Always the life of the interspecies mixer." As Lyra worked to disable the security systems, Calder tried to ignore the fact that the Murlacs were one wrong move away from discovering them. If they were caught, it wouldn't just be the end of the line for him. It would be the end for all of them. "Almost there," Lyra murmured, her fingers flying over the controls with practiced ease. "Just keep your eyes on the tentacles and leave the rest to me." Calder chuckled softly, a sound that died on his lips as the cell door swung open. He stumbled out, his limbs heavier than he'd realized, the adrenaline of escape coursing through his veins. "You're a sight for sore eyes," Calder said as they moved swiftly through the corridors, his mind already shifting to the task ahead. "Now let's blow this joint before we're the main attraction." Their escape was far from clean, alarms blaring, Murlac's guards converging on their location like a swarm of particularly grumpy bees. But they were close, so close to freedom, and the chance to turn the tide against their adversaries. Back at the resistance base, the atmosphere was poised on a knife edge. Word of their mission had spread and the tension was palpable, every eye watching the horizon for a sign of their return. The door burst open and the room erupted into cheers. Calder and Lyra, battered but unbowed, were greeted like heroes returning from the brink. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. "Did you miss me?" Calder asked, his voice hoarse but laced with warmth. Bex rolled their eyes, the corners of their mouth twitching upward despite themselves. "Not even a little, but I guess it's good to have you back." As the group settled in, plans were already forming. They had the data, the knowledge, and now, the will to fight back. The Murlacs thought they could demonstrate their dominance, but they hadn't counted on the sheer, unyielding stubbornness of humanity. Calder surveyed the room, a flicker of hope kindling in his chest. They were far from finished, far from safe, but they were alive and they had a chance. "All right, folks," Calder said, his voice carrying the weight of their shared struggle. "Let's show those tentacle-waving bastards what we're made of." The night stretched on, filled with hushed voices and hurried preparations. But beneath it all, a current of determination flowed, a fierce conviction that they could, against all odds, change their fate. As the first light of dawn crept over Titan, Calder stood with his team, ready to face whatever the universe threw at them next. And for the first time in a long time, he felt the stirrings of a forgotten feeling, one that whispered of possibility and defiance. Hope. Lyra Quell huddled in a makeshift bunker that was more patchwork than fortress, poring over the data pad like it was a treasure map, and she was a particularly enthusiastic pirate. The bunker smelled faintly of sweat, desperation, and the kind of ambition that usually ended with explosions. The resistance was quiet, an unusual state for a group of people who usually communicated via shouting or the universally understood language of throwing things. She tapped at the device, her fingers dancing over the alien script like a concert pianist with a penchant for sudden key changes. "Come on, you ugly piece of alien tech," Lyra muttered. "Give me something I can work with before I throw you into Titan's orbit." The data pad, not one to indulge in theatrics, calmly unveiled a schematic of the Mirlax's time dilation device. Her eyes scanned the intricate diagrams, noting the parts that resembled a blender married to a doomsday clock. Finally, she saw it, a flaw so glaring it might as well have been waving a flag and screaming for attention. "Well, slap my circuits and call me a toaster," Lyra murmured, the kernel of hope blossoming into a full-grown sapling of optimism. The Mirlax, in their rush to enslave humanity to a never-ending workweek, had overlooked a crucial detail. Their device had a resonance frequency issue, one that could make the whole thing spin wildly out of control with just a nudge in the right direction. Lyra sprang up, clutching the data pad as if it were a life preserver in a sea of hopelessness. "We've got them," she said, her voice carrying the same thrill as a gambler holding an ace up their sleeve. Bex, who had been pretending to nap in the corner, a skill honed to perfection, sat up, their expression the epitome of skepticism. "I'd ask what's got you so excited, but I'm afraid it'll involve a lot of technical jargon and end with us all running for our lives." "Nothing simpler," Lyra said, a grin spreading across her face. "The Mirlax's fancy new time-warping toy. It's got a flaw bigger than the gap in their sense of humor. We can disrupt it during their demonstration, make them look like the intergalactic idiots they are." Bex raised an eyebrow, a feat that required as much energy as any full-body workout. "And how do we do that without getting turned into tentacle bait?" Lyra held up the device, the mishmash of wires and components that could pass for modern art if you squinted hard enough. "Calder's little invention here. We just need to synchronize it with the Mirlax tech. Imagine their surprise when their demonstration turns into a time loop disaster they can't escape. A plan that insane just might work," Bex mused, their voice carrying the weight of countless failures. "But we'll need Calder. Can you imagine trying to get that thing to sync without him? It'd be like asking a fish to play poker. And if things go wrong, we'll all be a part of the universe's longest-running joke," Lyra added dryly, though the fire in her eyes suggested she wouldn't have it any other way. Back in Mirlax custody, Calder Vox was not having a great day. Then again, days had been pretty standardly awful since he'd been captured, so it was really more of a theme than an exception at this point. His captors had taken a liking to keeping him under the constant stress of not knowing when they'd come in to poke, prod, or generally be unpleasant. "Ever consider joining a book club?" he asked Squidward during one of his captors' silent patrols. "I hear they are a real hit. You could learn something about human culture that doesn't involve poking us with things." Squidward tilted its tentacled head, a gesture that Calder liked to interpret as interest, even if it was probably more akin to, "Will this ape ever shut up?" Calder's eyes flitted to the corner of his cell, where the Mirlax's time dilation device hummed ominously. He didn't need Lyra to tell him, it was the key to the Mirlax's plan. The difference being he couldn't exactly take it apart and put it back together in a way that wouldn't end with him being atomically inconvenienced. But Calder had one advantage. He was a stubborn son of a gun, and he had time to kill. He started by observing the Murlax guards' routines, learning their habits, because the more predictable they were, the more room he had to maneuver. One guard would always linger by the device, tentacles twitching like it wanted to push buttons but had been sternly told not to. Another seemed to have a penchant for leaving doors slightly ajar, as if the concept of a securely locked door simply hadn't been covered in alien orientation. Calder grinned to himself, the kind of grin that usually preceded someone saying, "Watch this." If he could just get his hands on one of the control panels, maybe even lift a tentacle print or two, he could start screwing around with their settings. Nothing too drastic, just enough to make the Murlax question whether their fancy toy was behaving. But first, he needed to do something about the guard rotation. Calder didn't fancy his chances against a squad of tentacles, no matter how charming he was in a crisis. Meanwhile, back at the resistance base, Lyra was rallying the troops, or what passed for troops in a resistance group that spent more time bickering than planning. She stood before them, the data pad held aloft like a digital Moses with a new set of commandments. "Listen up, everyone," Lyra said, her voice cutting through the murmurs like a knife through the universe's worst butter. "We've got a shot at turning the Murlax's demonstration into a spectacular failure, but we need all hands on deck. Everyone's got to play their part." The room was silent, part because Lyra had a way of commanding attention, and part because they were all painfully aware of what was at stake. Lives, futures, the chance to rub the Murlax's smug faces in their own failure. Jax, a wiry engineer whose mood swung between cynical and deadpan, spoke up. "And what's your part in this, Lyra? Besides waving your magic wand and hoping for the best?" "My part is making sure Calder can do his," Lyra replied without missing a beat, her expression unyielding. "We're getting him out, and we're making the Murlax choke on their own arrogance. But I can't do it alone." There was a tension in the air, a taut wire strung between despair and determination. They'd been fighting for so long it was hard to remember a time when they weren't, but this time they had a chance to win and not just survive. "So what do we do?" Bex asked, their usual sarcasm tempered with genuine curiosity. "We can't exactly stroll into the embassy and ask for Calder back like we're picking up a takeaway. We'll make our move during the demonstration," Lyra said, her mind already running through the countless variables and contingencies. "While the galaxy's watching them show off, we'll slip in and make sure it's a show they'll never forget." The room buzzed with a renewed energy, the kind that came with the reckless abandon of those with nothing left to lose. It was a plan that could go wrong in 100 different ways, but it was a plan, and right now, that was good enough. Back in his cell, Calder had managed to sneak a look at the control panel when Squidward was distracted by a particularly belligerent hologram. The Murlax's mistake, he mused, was underestimating the sheer pettiness of humanity. When faced with a cosmic threat, humans didn't go quietly. They went kicking, screaming, and making sarcastic comments until the very end. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Lyra, he hoped, or at least someone with the decency to speak in a language that wasn't clicks and squelches. But when the door opened, it was a Murlax he'd nicknamed Curly, for its unfortunate penchant for curling its tentacles in an imitation of a mustache. "Ah, Curly," Calder said, leaning casually against the wall. "Come to swap recipes or just here to gloat?" Curly, predictably, did neither. Instead, it gestured at Calder, then the door, its meaning as clear as the Martian bogs on a cloudy day. "Leaving me alone with your toys?" Calder asked, affecting a casual air. "I promise not to break anything important." Curly left without further ceremony, the door hissing shut behind it. Calder wasted no time, moving to the control panel with the kind of urgency usually reserved for running from wildfires. He fiddled with the interface, a series of buttons and levers designed for appendages that didn't have the decency to be fingers. His heart hammered against his ribs as he manipulated the settings, doing just enough to make the device seem temperamental without triggering an alarm. An error here, a false reading there, just enough to plant the seeds of doubt without tipping his hand. When Curly returned, Calder was once again the picture of innocence, leaning against the wall with a smirk that could power planets. "Back so soon? You must really enjoy my company." It would take time for the Murlacs to notice the discrepancies, and by then, Calder hoped Lyra would have made her move. He just had to keep playing his part and trust that she'd play hers. The day of the demonstration dawned with the same gray bleakness that had characterized every day on Titan since the Murlacs had arrived. The air was thick with the anticipation of an audience, prepared to witness humanity's humiliation. The resistance was a flurry of activity, Lyra at the center of it all like a conductor leading an orchestra of chaos. They had one shot to make this work, and Lyra intended to make damn sure it did. As they prepared to infiltrate the embassy, Lyra couldn't help but smile grimly. The Murlacs thought they were untouchable, that they could bend time and people to their will without consequence. But they'd never met a human who wasn't willing to stand defiantly in the face of cosmic absurdity and say, "Not today." The stage was set. All they needed now was the courage to see it through, and the stubbornness to make it count. And in the end, that might just be enough. The day of the grand demonstration dawned like a particularly dismal soap opera, minus the dramatic violin music. The Murlacs had gathered their finest, or at least those who could stand the smell of humans without gagging, to showcase their shiny new time dilation device. For them, this was a chance to show the galaxy their superiority, their mastery over time, and possibly to squeeze more hours of unpaid labor from their favorite human pets. Lyra Quell, however, had other plans. She crouched at the edge of a barren ridge overlooking the Murlacs' embassy, which looked like someone had taken a cheese grater to a giant squid and decided to call it architecture. The resistance had assembled in small, grim clusters around her, each armed with determination, a few makeshift weapons, and a shared disdain for their alien oppressors. "Okay, listen up," Lyra whispered, though she could have shouted considering the only ears around belonged to people who were already on board with her half-baked plan. "Calder's inside doing his thing. We hit them hard and fast when the demonstration starts. They'll be too busy patting themselves on the back to notice us slipping in." Bex, ever the cynic, raised a hand. "And what happens if they do notice? I don't know about you, but being turned into calamari isn't on my bucket list." "Then we improvise," Lyra shot back, flashing a grin that was more feral than friendly. "Besides, when has anything ever gone according to plan? It's the thought that counts." The plan was simple, which was its saving grace. Overthink things and you end up with a committee. And committees, especially those consisting of underfed, sleep-deprived humans, rarely achieved anything except inventing new ways to argue. As the Murlacs' delegates began their self-congratulatory speeches, the resistance moved into position. Calder, meanwhile, was playing the long game inside his cell, fiddling with the control panel in a manner that would make any self-respecting IT specialist weep. "You there, Curly?" Calder muttered, poking the holographic interface with the zeal of a man who'd spent too many years figuring out how to pirate movies. "How about we spice things up?" He'd managed to make a few key adjustments to the device's settings, nothing too obvious, just enough mischief to turn the demonstration into a comedy of errors. The Murlacs had always been a bit too sure of themselves, like a cat that thinks it can take down a whole flock of birds but ends up tangled in a ball of yarn instead. Outside, Lyra and her ragtag band of hopefuls watched as the Murlacs began their demonstration. The time dilation device, a monstrosity of wires and blinking lights that looked like a half-baked art project, hummed to life. "Now or never," Lyra said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent too long fighting a battle with no end in sight. She tapped her wrist device, triggering the sequence that would sync with Calder's modifications. Inside, the device sputtered, coughed, and then settled into a rhythm that could only be described as not quite right. Calder watched as the Murlacs' technicians began to frown, their tentacles twitching with confusion. Looks like someone didn't follow the instruction manual, Calder mused aloud, though his audience consisted of 4 walls and a door that wouldn't win any prizes for sound insulation. Lyra's device synced with Calder's sabotage, a combination that was about as stable as mixing fireworks with toddlers. The humming from the time dilation machine shifted, echoing a particularly troublesome buzz that one could only hope meant something was about to go gloriously, catastrophically wrong. The Murlacs, ever arrogant, didn't catch on immediately. But as the device's hiccups grew into a full-blown electronic seizure, their composure crumbled. The time dilation field began to warp and twist, catching the Murlacs in a loop of their own making. "Welcome to our very own Groundhog Day," Bex quipped, eyes alight with a mixture of disbelief and glee. "I wonder if they have a word for screwed in Murlaxian." The resistance stormed the embassy with all the subtlety of a freight train on roller skates. Lyra led the charge, her wrist device a beacon of information and chaos as she navigated through the corridors. They didn't have time for elegance or finesse. This was a smash-in grab, and their window was closing. Calder, sensing the shift outside his cell, prepared for his timely escape. When Curly returned, tentacles flailing as if trying to solve the mystery of why the universe had suddenly decided to turn against them, Calder was ready. "Hey, Curly," Calder called, drawing the alien's attention just long enough to slip past as the door opened. His heart raced, adrenaline fueling his every move as he sprinted through the hallways. He dodged, weaved, and occasionally ducked when a stray tentacle swung his way, making a beeline for the control room. When Calder burst into the room, Lyra was already there, her face a mask of determination and irritation, a combination that suited her. "Took you long enough," she snapped, though relief softened her words. "Traffic was a nightmare," Calder replied, grinning as he joined her at the main console. Together, they worked to ensure the Murlacs' demonstration ended in the way all demonstrations should, by blowing up in their faces. With the resistance keeping the Murlacs distracted, Lyra and Calder set to work undoing whatever technological nonsense the aliens had wrought. The time dilation device, now a whirling mess of lights and discontented beeping, was moments away from total failure. "Think we can reverse it?" Calder asked, hands moving over the interface with the speed and skill of someone who'd spent far too long trying to repair things that defied logic. "We don't need to reverse it," Lyra replied, her eyes locked on the screen. "We just need to break it in the right way. Make sure they can't put it back together." Calder nodded, trusting her judgment. If Lyra said she could do it, then by all the gods of technology, she would. The Murlacs might have had the advantage of numbers and resources, but they lacked what humans had in abundance, a reckless disregard for the impossible. Under their combined efforts, the device began to falter, its hum turning into a discordant wail that echoed through the halls. The Murlacs outside the control room were caught in their own temporal snafu, unable to stop the chain reaction unfolding in real time. The final sequence was initiated, a cascade of overrides and shutdowns that would ensure the device did more than just stop working. It'd take a chunk of the Murlacs' ego with it. As the countdown hit 0, Lyra and Calder exchanged a look, one part triumph, 2 parts disbelief. "We did it," Lyra said, the words almost incredulous. "Wouldn't have bet on it," Calder admitted. "But hey, not bad for a pair of underdogs with a death wish." The device imploded with a spectacular light show that was as much a middle finger to the Murlacs as a technical triumph. The time dilation field collapsed, releasing the humans trapped within its reach. The Murlacs, caught in their temporal loop, were left floundering, their grand display reduced to a fiasco. Freed from the grip of alien control, the humans took advantage of the chaos. The resistance surged forward, overwhelming their captors with the sheer force of desperation and defiance. The Murlacs, who had never faced a foe so hell-bent on making their life hell, were forced to retreat. As the dust settled, Lyra and Calder stood amid the ruins of the Murlacs' once imposing embassy. The resistance had won, if only by the narrowest of margins, and the Murlax's hold on them had been shattered. Bex joined them, looking more alive than they had in years. "We actually pulled it off," Bex said, shaking their head in disbelief. "I mean, we're probably going to pay for it later, but for now, we're heroes." "Heroes," Calder echoed, chuckling. "I think we'd need to be a bit cleaner for that title. Maybe just the people who didn't completely screw it up." Lyra laughed, the sound a balm to the tension that had gripped them since the plan's inception. "Whatever we are," she said, "we're free, and that's good enough for me." The victory was theirs, though the road ahead was anything but easy. They'd have to rebuild, regroup, and figure out what life looked like without the constant shadow of the Murlax looming over them. But for now, they had each other, and a world they could call their own again. And if the Murlax had learned anything from their ill-fated attempt at subjugation, it was this: never underestimate a group of humans with a grudge and a knack for turning even the most dire situation into a punchline. The aftermath of the Murlax embassy fiasco was about as chaotic as a spaceport during a zero-gravity happy hour. The once imposing structure now looked like an abstract art installation, a tribute to the power of poorly thought-out alien technology and a handful of desperate humans with nothing left to lose. Calder Vox and Lyra Quell stood amidst the rubble, surveying the scene with the kind of satisfaction that only comes from surviving against all odds. "Looks like we made quite the statement," Calder said, gesturing toward the wreckage with a smirk that could light up the darkest of space corridors. "Who knew blow it all to hell would be such an effective negotiation tactic?" Lyra chuckled, her eyes scanning the horizon, where the first light of a new day was creeping over Titan's barren landscape. "I'd say they got the message loud and clear," she replied, crossing her arms as if daring the universe to object. "And if they didn't, well, I'm sure they'll hear it in the echo." Around them, the human colony on Titan was slowly coming back to life, shaking off the shackles of Murlax oppression like a dog after a bath. The mood was cautiously optimistic, tinged with the kind of exhilarated disbelief that follows a night of unexpectedly successful rebellion. Bex joined them, looking more alive and less cynical than Calder had ever seen them. "So, we're heroes now, huh?" they said, the words still tasting strange on their tongue. "Guess we should start practicing our smug speeches for the inevitable interviews." "Yeah, right," Calder snorted. "Because nothing screams hero like a couple of underfed nerds with a knack for breaking things." The three of them shared a laugh, the sound rich with relief and the kind of camaraderie that only comes from shared danger. It was a nice change from the usual soundtrack of grumbling and swearing that accompanied resistance operations. As the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the scarred landscape, the humans began to gather, forming impromptu work parties to sift through the debris and salvage what they could. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and that made all the difference. Lyra watched them with something akin to pride mingling with disbelief. "Look at them go," she said, nodding toward a group struggling to right a toppled structure that had once served as a communications hub. "You'd think they'd just won the lottery instead of barely surviving an alien occupation. Guess there's something to be said for a little taste of freedom," Bex mused, their usual sarcasm tempered by genuine admiration. "Who knew people could be motivated by not wanting to be turned into time-loop drones?" Calder shrugged, feigning casualness even as his heart swelled at the sight. "At least we can say we left things better than we found them," he said, scratching at the stubble that had flourished during their ordeal. "It's not much, but it's a start, and a start it was." With the Murlax reeling from their very public defeat, the resistance had more breathing room than they'd had in years. Word spread quickly, rippling out across the solar system like an underdog anthem. Other colonies, long suffering under the tentacled thumbs of their alien overlords, began to stir with newfound hope and a stubborn refusal to be ground down. Calder found himself unexpectedly thrust into the role of a symbol, a living reminder that even the most downtrodden could have their day. It was as awkward as it was exhilarating, a mantle he wore with the grace of a giraffe on ice skates. Calder Vox, Resistance hero, he muttered to himself one evening as he wandered through the remnants of the Murlax embassy, now a makeshift headquarters for their rebuilding efforts. Who'd have thought Lyra caught up to him, her expression hovering between amusement and exasperation. If you keep talking to yourself, people are going to start thinking you're losing it, she teased, falling into step beside him. Let them think what they want, Calder replied, a grin tugging at his lips. I might be losing it, but at least now it's on my own terms. They stopped at the edge of what had once been the main control room, now a tangle of wires and shattered screens. Calder couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia for the chaos they'd wrought here, chaos that had somehow transformed into a tangible victory. Think they'll come back? Lyra asked, her voice low enough to almost be lost in the wind. The question hung between them, heavy with implications and the weight of an uncertain future. Probably, Calder admitted, rubbing the back of his neck as if trying to massage answers from the universe. But they won't find us the same. We're not just a bunch of scattered rebels anymore. We're a force to be reckoned with. He looked at Lyra, meeting her gaze with a steadiness that belied his usual flippancy. And maybe next time, they'll think twice about messing with us. A slow smile spread across Lyra's face, one that spoke of plans and possibilities that stretched far beyond Titan's desolate landscape. I like the sound of that, she said, nodding in agreement. We're not just fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting for something bigger. As they stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of their victory, it was easy to believe that anything was possible. The world might have been a mess, but it was their mess, and that gave it a kind of beauty that no amount of alien intervention could erase. Days turned into weeks, and the colony on Titan began to take on a new life. There were still challenges to face, the kind that came with being a human outpost in a universe that wasn't particularly fond of their kind. But the weight of despair was lifting, replaced by a gritty determination to carve out a future on their own terms. Calder found himself busier than ever, his skills in tech gadgetry suddenly in high demand as the colony worked to rebuild and reinforce their defenses. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and there was something satisfying about seeing tangible results from his efforts. Lyra, too, had her hands full, coordinating with other resistance cells and ensuring that their hard-won victory didn't crumble under the weight of bureaucracy and complacency. It was a delicate balance, one that required equal parts diplomacy and the occasional well-timed threat to keep things moving in the right direction. Their lives settled into a new kind of normal, one that lacked the constant threat of alien oversight, but was no less demanding in its own way. Calder and Lyra found themselves at the center of it all, their partnership evolving into something that went beyond shared danger and mutual respect. One evening, as they sat atop a makeshift bunker that had once been a Murlax surveillance outpost, Calder found himself reflecting on how far they'd come. The sky above was a tapestry of stars, distant and indifferent but somehow comforting in their constancy. "Ever think we'd make it this far?" he asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. Lyra leaned back, her gaze fixed on the heavens as if seeking answers among the constellations. "Honestly, no," she admitted, a hint of laughter in her voice, "but I'm glad we did. It's nice to know we're more than just a footnote in someone else's story." Calder nodded, his own thoughts drifting back to the early days of their struggle, a time when hope was in short supply and victory seemed like a distant dream. "Feels good to be writing our own chapter for a change," he agreed, letting the words settle into the quiet night. Below them, the colony buzzed with activity, the sounds of rebuilding mingling with laughter and the occasional burst of song. It was a symphony of resilience, a testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity that refused to be crushed no matter the odds. As the night wore on, Calder and Lyra remained on their perch, watching over the world they'd helped shape. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was theirs, and that made all the difference. In the distance, the horizon glowed with the promise of a new day, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Calder allowed himself to believe in the possibility of tomorrow. A tomorrow free from the shadow of the Murlacs, where humanity could thrive and grow, unburdened by the chains of their oppressors. "We've come a long way," Calder said, his voice barely more than a whisper carried on the wind. "And we've got a long way to go. But maybe, just maybe, we'll get there." Lyra smiled, a fierce, unyielding expression that spoke to the strength they'd found in themselves and each other. "We will," she vowed, a promise etched into the fabric of the universe itself. No matter what it takes. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, bathing Titan in its golden glow, Calder and Lyra remained side by side, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they were unstoppable, a force to be reckoned with in a universe that had underestimated them for too long. And as the sun rose on a new era for humanity, it was clear that while the battle might be over, the war was far from won. But for Calder, Lyra, and the people of Titan, the future was finally within reach, and they were more than ready to seize it with both hands. In the end, it wasn't about being heroes or legends. It was about being human, flawed, irreverent, and undeniably resilient. And that was more than enough.